What would you do if, while flying a passenger plane at 37,000 feet, you suddenly saw something in the cockpit that absolutely should not be there? One pilot saw it, only for a few seconds, but those seconds changed his life forever. A moment many would later call a miracle of the Virgin Mary. But before we continue, tell me something. Leave a comment saying where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'd love to see how far these stories and the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. Now let me tell you about Captain Marcus Weber. Marcus was the kind of pilot who seemed as if he had been born to fly. He was 54 years old, with more than 20 years of experience flying commercial aircraft. He commanded one of the largest planes in the fleet and had a reputation that every pilot respected. Passengers rarely noticed him, and that was exactly how it should be. Because when a flight goes perfectly, no one thinks about the person in the cockpit. Marcus had gray hair, perfect posture, and a calm voice that could make even nervous passengers relax the moment they heard it over the intercom. Outside of work, however, Marcus lived a quiet and almost invisible life. He had been divorced for 6 years. No children, few friends. Most of his colleagues knew almost nothing about him beyond the cockpit. He lived alone in a practical apartment near the airport. His life followed a simple pattern: work, gym, sleep, repeat. Flying was his routine, and he liked it that way. But there was something else about Marcus that almost no one knew. Marcus Weber was an atheist. He simply didn't believe. He never had. To him, the world was explained by science, physics, and mathematics. Those were real. Those were measurable. Everything else, religion, miracles, faith, were stories people told themselves when they needed comfort. When other pilots mentioned praying before difficult flights, Marcus would only smile politely. When passengers thanked God after a smooth landing, Marcus had a different thought entirely. Thank the engineers and 20,000 hours of training. He wasn't angry about religion. He simply saw no reason for it. And for 20 years, his worldview worked perfectly. He trusted instruments, protocols, data. Those things had never failed him. Until one Tuesday in April. It was supposed to be a routine flight. Boston to Denver. 163 passengers. 6 crew members. Aircraft fully inspected. Weather forecast: mostly clear skies with a few isolated storms along the route. Nothing unusual. Marcus completed the pre-flight briefing with his co-pilot, Jake Morrison. Jake was 28 years old. Young for a commercial pilot, but competent. Sometimes a little nervous, but eager to learn. The forecast shows stable weather along the route, Jake said while checking his tablet. A few isolated clouds, nothing serious. Marcus nodded. Good. Should be a smooth flight. Takeoff was perfect. The plane climbed steadily until they reached cruising altitude, 37,000 feet, above the cloud layer where the sky was clear and bright. Marcus activated the autopilot and leaned back slightly in his seat. Jake continued updating the flight log. Inside the cockpit, the steady hum of the engines created a quiet, almost peaceful atmosphere. You know that moment when everything works exactly as it should? Every instrument reading correct. Every system green. Every number exactly where it belongs. Marcus trusted that feeling. For 90 minutes, nothing happened. Passengers watched movies. Flight attendants served drinks. The pilots monitored instruments. A completely ordinary flight. Then Jake noticed something. Captain, we have a storm cell developing ahead. Marcus leaned forward. That wasn't in the forecast. Jake zoomed the weather radar. The storm formation was large and growing quickly. Distance about 100 miles, Jake said. But it's expanding fast. Marcus studied the radar screen. We'll request a deviation before we get too close. He reached for the radio. But before he could transmit, the sky ahead flashed. Lightning flickered deep inside the towering clouds on the horizon. And then, crack! A violent bolt of lightning shot out from the storm and struck the aircraft. The cockpit exploded with white light. The sound was deafening. Lightning strike! Jake shouted. Marcus was already scanning the instruments. Lightning strikes were rare, but not unheard of. Positive lightning from distant storm clouds could travel miles. For 5 seconds, everything seemed fine. Then the screens began to flicker. We've got electrical instability, Jake said, his voice rising slightly. Primary system oscillating. Marcus remained calm. Electrical disturbances happened. They were inconvenient, but manageable. Jake followed the checklist procedures. The lights stabilized. But then one of the radar screens flickered and went black. Marcus felt a tightening in his chest. The radar was essential. Without it, they couldn't see the storm's movements. Trying to reboot, Jake said quickly. He pressed several commands. The screen flickered, displayed static, then went black again. No response, Captain. Marcus grabbed the radio. Tower, this is Flight 214. We experienced a lightning strike. Weather radar is down. Requesting alternate route. The response came immediately. Copy that, Captain. We're tracking a significant storm cell approximately 80 miles ahead. Suggest deviation north. It's the most direct route. Marcus studied the navigation map. North led through the North Platte Valley, a natural corridor between higher terrain. It made sense. Jake, what do you think? Jake reviewed the map. North looks good. Shorter route too. Saves fuel. Marcus nodded. He was about to confirm the northern deviation. Then something strange happened. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't logic. It was a sensation. A sudden, unexplained discomfort in his chest. A hesitation. Marcus ignored it. Feelings didn't matter. Data did. He lifted the radio. Tower, confirming deviation to the north. Then it happened. A soft blue light suddenly filled the cockpit. Not from the screens. Not from the instruments. It came from somewhere inside the cockpit itself. Marcus turned his head and froze. A woman stood between the two pilot seats. No, not standing. Floating slightly above the floor, as if gravity had no hold on her. She wore a long blue garment. A simple dress. But the color was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. A deep, radiant blue that almost seemed to glow. A veil covered her head, framing a face Marcus struggled to comprehend. It wasn't beauty in the normal sense. It was something else. Something perfect. Compassion seemed to radiate from her presence like warmth. Her eyes looked directly into his. And then she lifted her hand. She pointed. Not north. Her voice was calm, but urgent. South. The gesture was firm. Clear. Absolute. Go south. Marcus froze completely. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His hand still held the radio. 5 seconds. Maybe less. Maybe more. Time seemed to slow. She continued looking at him with that impossible calm. Pointing. South. Then suddenly, she vanished. As if she had never been there at all. The cockpit returned to normal. Normal lights. Normal engine sounds. Normal instruments. Except Marcus Weber was shaking. Captain. Jake's voice pulled him back to reality. You were saying? Marcus slowly turned toward him. Jake was watching him, waiting for confirmation of the northern route. Did you see her? Marcus whispered. Jake blinked. See who, Captain? Marcus glanced at the empty space between the seats. Nothing. Just the narrow passage inside the cockpit. Nothing, Marcus muttered. He swallowed, his hand still trembling. He lifted the radio again. Tower, change of plans. We're diverting south through the Arkansas Valley. There was a brief pause. Captain Weber, confirm southern route? That adds approximately 15 minutes. Confirmed. Copy that. Authorized southern deviation through the Arkansas Valley. Maintain current altitude. Jake stared at Marcus. Captain, north is the recommended route. Tower suggested it. Marcus stared straight ahead. Why south? Jake asked. Marcus had no answer. How could he explain? How could he say he had just seen an impossible woman standing in the cockpit pointing the way? I just have a feeling about the north, Marcus said quietly. Jake frowned. A feeling? The disbelief in his voice was obvious. Captain, with all due respect, feelings aren't. I know. Marcus cut Jake off gently, but firmly. Adjusting course. His hands moved across the controls, and the aircraft slowly began turning to the right, abandoning the northern path and drifting south instead. Jake said nothing, but Marcus could feel the tension beside him. 15 extra minutes of flight time. More fuel burned. And no real explanation except the captain's feeling. Marcus kept his posture steady, but inside his mind chaos was raging. What had he just seen? A hallucination? Impossible. It had been too real. Too vivid. The light, the blue dress, that face, those eyes. And that overwhelming peace that seemed to fill the cockpit in those few seconds. South. Go south. For 20 years Marcus had trusted one thing above all else. Logic. 20 years of instruments, procedures, and precise calculations. 20 years as a convinced atheist. And in 5 seconds, everything he believed had been shaken. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Marcus Weber's life. The aircraft continued south, slowly skirting the enormous storm system. Jake performed his duties professionally, but the confusion in his expression was impossible to hide. The storm clouds soon became visible through the cockpit window. Huge towers of dark clouds rose like mountains, flashing with lightning deep inside. The Arkansas Valley route kept them safely distant. Occasional light turbulence shook the aircraft. Nothing serious. Everything seemed normal, and that was when Marcus began to doubt himself. 15 minutes added to the flight. Fuel wasted. A confused co-pilot. All because of what? A vision. 5 seconds of something that should not exist. They were almost clear of the storm area when the radio suddenly crackled. "Attention all aircraft on this frequency," the air traffic controller said, his voice unusually tense. "Reports of severe turbulence in the North Platte Valley." Another voice responded immediately. "Denver Control, this is Flight 672. Confirming. We nearly lost control. Extreme turbulence. It didn't appear on radar. We have multiple injuries on board. Requesting paramedics upon landing." "Copy that," the controller replied. "Medical assistance will be waiting. All aircraft are advised to avoid the area." Jake slowly turned toward Marcus. His face had gone pale. That's the Northern Valley," he whispered. "The one the tower suggested." Marcus felt his hands tighten around the controls. Jake continued quietly. "Captain, if we had gone north." He didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. They would have been right there, right in the middle of it. Marcus felt something cold move through his chest. It was real. What had happened in the cockpit had been real. "How did you know?" Jake asked quietly. "How the hell did you know?" Marcus stared forward through the windshield at the calm blue sky ahead. His hands were trembling again, but this time for a completely different reason. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I saw something." Jake blinked. "You saw something on the radar?" Marcus shook his head. "No." He pointed slowly to the space between the seats. "Here." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath. It sounded insane. Completely insane. But it was the truth. "A woman," Marcus said. "Dressed in blue. She appeared right there, between us." Jake stared at him, completely confused. "She pointed south." The cockpit fell silent. Jake slowly looked toward the empty space Marcus had indicated. There was nothing there. Just air. "Captain, I didn't see anything." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "But I did." The rest of the flight passed in silence. The aircraft moved steadily through calm skies while lightning still flickered in the distant storm clouds. Jake never mentioned the incident again. Marcus flew mechanically, his mind somewhere far away. They landed in Denver without incident. Passengers disembarked normally, chatting, stretching, collecting luggage. None of them knew they had just narrowly escaped disaster. When Marcus and Jake stepped out of the cockpit, the operations supervisor was already waiting. "Captain Weber, I need a word." Marcus knew immediately what this was about. Inside the office, the supervisor spoke seriously. "Captain, I need to understand your decision to divert south. The tower recommended the northern route. It was more efficient. Why did you change it?" Marcus hesitated. The truth was impossible to explain. "A feeling," he finally said. "I wasn't comfortable with the northern route." The supervisor studied him carefully. "A feeling?" "Yes, sir." The supervisor leaned back in his chair. "Are you aware of what happened in the North Platte Valley?" "We heard the radio reports." The supervisor nodded slowly. 3 aircraft encountered severe clear air turbulence, completely invisible on radar. 1 aircraft nearly lost control. Another reported multiple injuries and structural damage. He paused. "Based on your flight timing, Captain, you would have entered that area at exactly the worst moment." Marcus felt the weight of those words. 163 passengers. 6 crew members. "Your instinct saved your aircraft," the supervisor continued. "That turbulence couldn't be detected by radar. There was no way to predict it." He nodded once. "You followed your intuition, and it was the right call. I won't question it further. Just know this, Captain. You saved a lot of lives today." After leaving the office, Marcus walked slowly to the crew rest lounge. He needed to be alone. He sat in a chair in the quiet corner of the room. His hands were still shaking slightly. 169 people had just been saved. But Marcus knew something the supervisor didn't. He hadn't saved anyone. She had. The woman in blue. The impossible woman who had appeared for 5 seconds in the cockpit and changed everything. Marcus closed his eyes. He tried to remember every detail. The deep blue dress, the veil, the peaceful face, eyes that seemed to look directly through him, and that clear gesture. South. Who was she? For 20 years Marcus had been certain there was nothing beyond the physical world. And now that certainty had shattered. Because he had seen something. Not imagined. Not guessed. Seen. When Marcus returned to Chicago the next morning, he went straight home. He called the airline and requested 3 days off. He told them he wasn't feeling well. Which was true, just not in the way they thought. For 2 days Marcus tried to explain it rationally. He researched pilot stress, fatigue, hallucinations, medical journals describing how the brain can create vivid images under pressure. But none of those explanations matched what he experienced. Nothing explained the reality of that moment. And there was one undeniable fact. He changed the route, and it saved everyone. Coincidence? Luck? Premonition? Or something else? On the third day, Marcus did something he never imagined he would do. He went to a church. He hadn't entered one since childhood. He had been baptized Catholic because his mother believed, but he abandoned all of it as a teenager. But now, at 54 years old, Marcus pushed open the heavy wooden door of a small Catholic church near his apartment. The building was almost empty. A few elderly people sat scattered in the pews, praying quietly. Marcus walked slowly down the aisle. He didn't know why he was there. He didn't know what he expected to find. He passed paintings of saints he didn't recognize. A large crucifix above the altar. Candles burning softly. And then he saw it. At a small side altar stood a statue. Not very large. Maybe 3 feet tall. But unmistakable. A woman dressed in blue. Marcus stopped walking. His feet refused to move. The blue dress. The veil. The peaceful expression. The outstretched hands. It was her. Not exactly. The statue was simple plaster, painted and still. But the resemblance was undeniable. Marcus walked closer. Slowly. As if moving through a dream. At the base of the statue was a small plaque. Our Lady, Virgin Mary. Marcus's legs suddenly weakened. He collapsed onto the nearest pew. His eyes remained fixed on the statue. The Virgin Mary. The Mother of Jesus. The figure he had dismissed his entire life as myth. And she had appeared in his cockpit. Marcus began to cry. Not quiet tears. Deep, uncontrollable sobs that shook his entire body. Years of certainty breaking apart all at once. Forgive me, he whispered between breaths. Forgive me. I never believed. I never wanted to believe. And you saved us anyway. One elderly woman glanced toward him with concern, but did not approach. She simply continued praying. Marcus remained there for a long time. Crying. Praying for the first time in his adult life. He didn't know the words. Didn't know the correct prayers. He simply spoke honestly. I don't know what to do now. I don't know what this means. But I saw you. I know I saw you. When Marcus finally left the church an hour later, the sun was bright overhead. Cars moved along the street. People walked past as if nothing unusual had happened. Life continued exactly as it always had. But for Marcus Weber, nothing would ever be the same again. In the months that followed, something about Marcus Weber began to change. The other pilots noticed it first. The once distant captain now greeted the crew with warmth. He smiled more often. His voice carried a calm gentleness that hadn't been there before. Even during difficult flights or stressful situations, Marcus seemed different, quieter, but at the same time, more peaceful. He still had many questions. His faith was new, fragile, uncertain, full of doubts. But one thing he no longer questioned. That night, in April, for 5 impossible seconds, the Virgin Mary had been in the cockpit with him. And because of that, Marcus knew something he had never felt before in his life. He was no longer alone. Marcus Weber still flies today. He is still a captain. He still trusts instruments, data, and procedures, just as every good pilot must. But something in his life is different now. Inside the pocket of his uniform, he carries a small medal. Our Lady of Guadalupe. It was a gift from a friend he met at the church he now attends regularly. Before every flight, when Marcus steps into the quiet cockpit and sits in the captain's seat, he does something he never once did during his first 20 years of flying. He prays. Not a long prayer. Not a formal one. Just a few quiet words spoken in the silence before the passengers board. Thank you for being with me. Protect everyone on this aircraft. Help me make the right decisions. And if you made it all the way to the end of Marcus Weber's story, I want you to do something simple. Write one word in the comments. South. The direction that made no sense. The direction that logic rejected. The direction that saved 169 lives. The direction she pointed to when everything else said north. Every time I read the word south in the comments, I'll know that one more person believes miracles can still happen. And before we finish, I want to thank the first 20 people who shared their faith in the comments. And remember, the next 20 people who comment may appear in the next video. Thank you for being part of this community of faith. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who may need a little hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue to bless and protect you and your family. Amen.